It's not up to you to finish it, but you are obligated to start.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 10,000 Heroes Show. We are here to help you investigate, clarify, and refine your own sense of purpose, and then align your life to be in harmony with it. We do this through inspiring examples, difficult conversations, and experiments. So our guest today is Rabbi Rachel Weiss, and this interview really did it for me. There's just some things I reliably love listening to and talking about. Psychedelic medicines, mystic poetry, loving one's enemies, astronomy, the pursuit of mastery, any of those things, I just can't get enough. And my conversation with Rachel hit this really sweet spot, snuggled right in between social change and spirituality that I just totally loved. As she so eloquently says, Rachel is in the business of hope, just like Uncle Jamal, who is our first guest on this podcast. And hope is this rare jewel that can transform our everyday experience from drudgery to inspiration, and has fueled some of the most beautiful movements of our times, like the Black Civil Rights struggle in the 60s and various independence movements all over the world, from Haiti in 1791 all the way up to today. So please join us and drink deeply from Rachel's wisdom, inspiration, patience, and hope. So as you know, the podcast is called 10,000 Heroes. And really, the idea is to focus on a new definition of heroism, which for me is aligning ourselves with our full potential to joyfully serve. So to contribute to the evolution of human society and human consciousness while being fully in line with our joy and our purpose. So I have a sense that you're not unfamiliar with that idea.
That's something that I would say is sort of what I do in the world, right? Is how do we elevate the daily into the holy?
Yeah. And how do you do that now? I'd love to hear a little bit of how you do that now and then how you came to that. What are all the different ways you did that before now? I
mean, I think it's really hard to be a human being who is an empathetic, compassionate, awake person in the world right now, right? I think, live in a time of tremendous privilege and tremendous opportunity and tremendous resources. And we also live in a time of battles for power and control that make people feel like who they are and what they do is not worthy. And I think that is incredibly problematic. So, a friend of mine once said, my whole business is hope, right? As rabbis, my whole business is to bring people together and bring people to a place where they feel like they're not alone in the world. They're not alone in the universe, and that there is the possibility of continuing to work to make things even better and to find meaning and joy and understand we can, hold joy and brokenness at the same time. And that doesn't diminish the joy and it doesn't diminish the brokenness. It's just the complexity of being a human being.
Yeah. And so how do you cultivate that hope while holding on and honoring that sense of brokenness?
Sure. Nobody is new at this, right? Humanity has been around for a very long time, and we don't do a very good job of learning from the past, but we're standing on shoulders of the people who were standing on shoulders of the people who are standing on shoulders of the generations before them, who in small ways, because what we do as human beings and as societies is evolve and change, are living proof that change happens. And I think part of that is recognizing and making transparent and really lifting up the fact that, making that transparent, right? That we have always been evolving and changing and growing, and that who we are right now is the product of all of the things that we've lived through and the product of things that people thousands of years ago lived through. And that we may not see the change right now. We may not see the progress, but we live it. And how we make connections between the things that have been around for much longer than we have and the things that we live and do in our daily lives, I think is really important, right? So for me, as a rabbi, I use liturgy, I use text, I use history, I use culture, right? So looking at Jewish traditions, we have this incredible text called the Torah that is a preserved understanding of the ancient Israelites, right? Torah is, for some Jews, Torah is the word of God. But what does that mean? Because we have never heard God talk to us, and we don't know who or what or how God is. And in Judaism, we don't even know God's name. We know that God's name is I will be that which I will be, which is an evolving and growing idea that in Hebrew is Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, which literally means I will become that which I will become. That God is a process. God is an energy. God is not an entity that is static. God's growing along with us. And so what Torah is a group of ancient Israelites who used the tools at their disposal, which were words, to write down their experiences through story of who God was and who they were supposed to be and who their experience of the divine was. And that doesn't mean that that's our experience. Those metaphors change over time because the metaphor of God as patriarchal king really doesn't resonate for a lot of people, including me. But the idea of people who have recorded their story, and that we, for thousands of years, as a group of Jews, have held that story core to our identity, which is that humanity is created in the divine image, and humanity is created and is good. And we go through lots of very messy experiences with our families of origin and with our tribes and with our people. And ultimately, through experiences of enslavement and experiences of oppression, we organize ourselves to be able to work for liberation and then to recreate society all over again. That's the core of what Torah is. It's people saying we came from a place that was messy. We come from a place where we didn't want to live infantilized in an idyllic Eden-like place. We wanted to go out and live and explore and be in the world and figure it all out. And it's hard and it's messy and it's painful and there's evil. And this is one example of how a people got through that and then went to the perhaps greatest metaphor of oppression, which is enslavement, to the greatest metaphor of freedom, which is an experience of liberation. And then now what, right? We wander in the desert and try and figure out how we create rules and practices and laws to treat each other well and to stay close and connected with God. And we wander in the desert trying to get there. That's the whole metaphor of the Torah. And for me, that's incredibly powerful because it says that none of us are alone. We do it in community. No struggle is brand new. We've all been through this before, even if it was our ancestors who laid a path, and we can build on that. And for me, I think that is one of the ways that we can find anchors in very stormy places.
Okay. There's a lot there.
There's my sermon. There you go. So yes, I can also be shorter.
So I want to go back to becoming. I have a relationship with that word just because my name, Ankur, in Sanskrit means the process of a flower, like a bud opening. So it's a synonym of becoming as well. And I'd never heard that the way that God is referred to in your tradition is I am becoming that which I am. And then the process, kind of the heroic, almost like archetypical heroic journey you mentioned, it's like adventure, challenge, tragedy, enslavement, liberation. But then is the idea that just repeats over and over? It's like we're always in another, like a kind of like a spiraling helix of adventure and enslavement and liberation?
That's why we read the Torah every year. And actually, one of the things that I think is really important about Torah is that we started at the beginning on this holiday called Simchat Torah, and we read the very beginning of Torah, and we read it in order, a little piece at a time. And when we get to the end of the year, in the same holiday of Simchat Torah, we read the very last lines of the Torah. And the last lines describe, and the people were at the edge of the river, and they hadn't crossed over yet, and they were about to, and then Moses breathed his last breath and said his last words, and then Moses dies. And there was never a leader or a prophet as wise as Moses in all of Yisrael. And then immediately in the same sentence, we say, Bereshit bara Elohim, and then in the beginning, God created the world. So two things happen there. One, we spiral, right? It's a complete circle. We start at the beginning, and then when we get to the end, immediately we start over. But I do think it is a spiral and not a circle. And two, the description in Torah of crossing the river and getting to the promised land is never described. In the accounting of the prophets,
it ends before the river's crossed.
Before the river's crossed. And then what do? We start all over again. Back to the beginning of, the beginning of the beginning. In the beginning, there was light, right? And while historically we have records in the prophets and in the writings and in all of the laws and teachings of Judaism that says, okay, when the people then were in the land, this is what happened. But the moment of, and then they crossed the river isn't there. There's nothing there that describes that. You know, the metaphor very much for our lives, I think, is that we don't actually get there, right? We are perpetually living in the wilderness because we don't know what's next. Judaism would say, okay, well, what is next is when the world is healed and put back together, meaning all of the injustices are brought to healing and there is no more evil and cruelty and, you know, control of power in the world, then we will live in this messianic age of, you know, what Judaism calls olam haba, which means the world to come. But we don't know when that will be. And we know the world is still broken. So what do? We keep going and we keep going.
Okay. And that messianic age is kind of analogous to the concept in Christianity or the nirvana concept in Hinduism?
In some way, yes. It doesn't have to do, so there's not a personal relationship with that. There is not if I live my life this way, I will get to heaven.
Ah, I see.
And whereas Christianity might say, I have a personal relationship with God in this particular way, and that's who I'm accountable in these ways. In Judaism, it's collective. We have a personal responsibility to each other, and that we have a responsibility to God, but not individually, if I do this, then I will have this reward. It's all collective. If I do this, I will contribute to the healing of the world.
Wow. It's really a team sport. And so, yeah, we can't get to this. I mean, this is really how I see our society. It's awesome. It's like we can't get to the outcome we want unless everybody gets there.
That's right. That's right. There's this great phrase that that comes in the Mishnah, which is a collection of rabbinic writings and laws. And after great battles and everything looks like, the temple has been destroyed, the history is, we're in this place of diaspora, of wandering. And the rabbi says, and the phrase in Hebrew is lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, which means it is not up to you to finish the work. Velo ata ben chorin lihibatel mimena, which means, but neither are you free to desist from beginning it, right? It's not up to you to finish it, but you are obligated to start.
God, I just want to cry. It reminds me of, so I did this pilgrimage years ago in India, where Gandhi is like my personal hero and teacher. And I walked following the salt march path that he did from Ahmedabad for 400 kilometers, took 26 days down to the ocean where he made salt and broke the law in this first kind of massive act of civil disobedience. And then there's this little museum there, and they have this quote on the wall of the museum that it's Nehru's part of his oration when Gandhi died. And I don't even remember the exact words, but I'm having the same feeling hearing you say that words about it's.
I can see it in your voice and in your body and in your face and all of that. That's the awe, right? Like that is, for me, that's God, not this external thing. It's an internal experience of blossoming, of awakening, of becoming, and of connection, of saying like, wow. Right? There's a reason that phrase became like, oh my God, right? That feeling of intense emotional, because it touches something in us, right? It's a connection. It's a spark. It is something that is connecting of, we don't know each other. We've never met each other. And yet here we are in this very deep place of what touches our hearts and our souls most deeply. And that's connecting in this moment. And for me, that's actually where the hope is. And that's where the transformation is. Because, whether someone has an understanding of what they do in the world, because this is their relationship with, with a God or with Jesus or with, the still small voice inside, whatever that looks like in their religious or spiritual tradition, or they just feel like they're grounded in the earth. There is a way in which I think we as human beings strive to understand that we're not alone and that there's something bigger than we are that whole. And whether it's a being, whether it's the universe, whether it's the atoms, it's the cells, it's the memories that live on. I mean, I think that's a remarkable thing to say like, this is, we are bigger than this moment. in time. And this moment might be full of despair and heartbreak and anger and wrath. I mean, we're living in it in this second, right? I mean, hello. And how might we think about that also actually with our joy, right? Everything is temporal, right? We're living it. This joy is everything that, the phrase in Hebrew is gamze avor, this too shall pass, the good and the bad. So for Judaism and for me, it's about what do we do in this time that we're alive? What do we do to be more loving? What do we do to be more healing? What do we do to be more repairing, more creative, more joyful, more, deeply connected to each other? Because that's actually what becoming a whole is about, right? We open our doors at Passover for Elijah to see if is Elijah here yet? Right? Will he come in? Elijah is the prophet in Judaism who will arrive, signaling that the time of the Messiah is here. The time of that perfect world is here. And, every year we close the door and say, not here yet. Got to still keep working.
But you set like a place setting for him, right?
Right. We set a separate cup of wine. We're like, here, come in and enjoy. Because, when you knock on the door, we don't know what you're going to look like or who you're going to be. It could be anybody, right? Which is why you don't turn away the stranger, right? This could be the person. You could be coming. And we want to make sure that you're treated well so that in case it's the Messiah, this is the signal.
Yeah. So, going back to that, I don't know what the word is, edict or that declaration. And that's that same feeling I had when reading about, Nehru talking about Gandhi. Sometimes, and I'm curious if this resonates with you and how you address it. If so, sometimes I can feel that as a real joy that I get to be part of this very long movement of collective liberation, and I get to do my part and unearth my genius and utilize it. And sometimes I feel it as a real weight that I've got, I have this burden or this obligation to be part of it, and it's almost crushing in terms of what's asked of me. Do you experience both of those?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I think part of that is called being alive and being a sentient being that is feeling. I marched in the Pride Parade in Chicago yesterday, proudly with a big, sign that said, another queer rabbi for bodily autonomy, right? This is with a whole group of folks thinking, wow, I can march in a Pride Parade and hold hands with my wife and kiss her in the street and be with our children and have thousands of people that are cheering and celebrating and have it be the best feeling in the world. We have made it to this moment. We are celebrating. The world could feel like this. This is amazing. And I can think to congregants of mine who, in the 70s and 80s, dared to hold hands in public for the first time ever in a Pride Parade after being together for 50 years because it wasn't safe, right? And to know that in some places, in New York City's Pride Parade, they had to lock all the mailboxes on the route because they were afraid of pipe bombs, right? So thinking about there's so much, and this feels great, and then to get home in the same way that you feel super happy, exhausted, and feel oh, now we got to get up and keep working tomorrow. We got to keep doing it. It's still here. And I think the same way, there's a really beautiful theology that is coming out of some Black women's spirituality, which is about the theology of the nap ministry. There's I'll find a link. It's a great if you look up the nap ministry, it is basically taking a nap. Rest is an act of resistance, actually stopping and taking a nap. Judaism has this concept, we call it Shabbat, right? This is the Sabbath in which you're not allowed to do work and you're supposed to rest and renew. The phrase in Hebrew is Shabbat vayi nafash, which comes from the word nefesh, which is soul, and is also the same word of breath. So this idea that on Shabbat, we have to rest, we have to stop, and we have to re-soul ourselves. We have to fill ourselves back up. And the nap ministry is this idea that our entire society, is productive based, right? How much are you producing? How much are you earning? What are you doing? What are you completing? Show it to me, right? It's very competitive. That's the whole economic capitalist system, right? Who can make more and do more? And this revolutionary idea of this nap ministry is that actually stopping and resting to refuel yourself is really important. And back to the collective, we have a collective responsibility to say, okay, you're taking a nap and that's what you need to be doing because we need you. And in the meantime, while you're taking your nap, I'm going to keep working. And then when I'm ready to stop, I get to take my nap and you keep working, right? It's this idea that rest is actually a requirement for being able to do this. My daughter came home. She's almost 14, and she came home the day after, Friday afternoon after we heard the announcement from the Supreme Court destroying Roe. And, I said, did you hear what happened today? And she said, I don't have any energy right now for like big government angry decisions. I know I'm going to have to do that. Like, I know you have to be in this place for your work and for all of this, but right now I am just so exhausted. And I said, that's totally fine. I'm going to be exhausted tomorrow, and then you can pick it up. And then the next day, and then the next day. And she said, yeah, of course, I will do it. I'm here. We're here. And that's, I think, part of what this is about, right? That the crushing weight is too much, and the crushing beauty can be overwhelming. And figuring out how we hold, that's sort of, I think that is the holding both at the same time. We can be deeply in despair and awed at the beauty at the same time. And in my work as a rabbi, sometimes you have an incredible celebratory life cycle moment plans, and some very dear person to you dies the day before, right? Sometimes you bury your beloved, and then the next day it's your child's b'nai mitzvah. You have to be at both. And that's the extremes of life. And it's not always that obvious, but that happens all the time. Last week, I had a funeral in the morning and a baby naming in the afternoon. Right? And the baby who we named was conceived, and we knew that the parent was pregnant. She later found out as her mother was dying. And that baby is now named in memory of her mother. And that is that cycle of those things we can't know and we can't try and control, but they're big. And sometimes just feeling them is the best we can do.
Yeah. Wow. I'm really, I'm impressed by the self-awareness of the 14-year-old. I don't think I would have had. I think I just would have been like sullen or pissed off.
Totally. 14-year-olds these days, oh my God, they are amazing. Like they just are like, they're more self-aware. They're learning, right? Like they're being taught social studies in a way that's actually relevant, at least where we live. It's amazing. And that's so phenomenal that we can actually, like that gives me hope too, right? These are our kids who are going to just take it in their hands and run with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so great to be able to have faith in that generation. So what were you like at 14, and how did you get to where you are now?
I was someone who was smart and did really well in school and, cared about like being kind and being nice to people, and like, was really hard to have friends. Really hard to like, was never the popular one, was always somebody who was like, would get called on by a teacher but wouldn't get invited to the party. Floated from group to group, never really found my people. And I think for me, it was like I hated being a teenager. And I got to college and found much more of myself and my folks, and, the process of understanding gender and understanding sexuality and injustice in the world, and, in all, and just opening my mind and my heart to, what does it mean to learn in incredible ways? So for me, I think, I always had this sort of, I probably had more of an old soul, but I, was not a kid who had a lot of fun. But I think I am really, delighted to be who I am now. And that's really amazing. I think I had wonderful role models and wonderful teachers, and, met a lot of different kinds of people, which was great. I was a social worker when I graduated from college. I went to Grinnell, very liberal, social justice, artsy, creative. I was a Spanish major, even though I knew that I wanted to be a rabbi, but I wanted to actually have real life, real world experience. And I love languages. So I spent 6 years after I graduated from college running a family resource center for Mexican immigrant families in the northern suburbs of Chicago. Which was a total education in the fact that I knew nothing about what it was like to not be a white Jewish middle class woman. Right. It was a great, great opportunity. I was like, yes, I speak Spanish. Great. And I was fluent. And then I was like, oh, wow, I know nothing at all and learned so much.
Tell me something you learned during that time.
Oh, wow. I came in to there, I came into to this job, and I worked in an apartment complex that had 250 apartments and 2,500 residents. Right? Like 10 people per apartment. Very, people who, some people had been here for a little bit. Some people got here yesterday. People went back and forth. And, that is an area of Chicago that is surrounded by like the wealthiest communities in the country. And so what do wealthy communities need? They need some sort of population that will do the service industries that supports the lifestyle. So this tiny immigrant community of Highwood, which originally was Irish immigrants, and then it was Italian immigrants, and now it's Mexican immigrants, would, do all of the, all the work. And so I'm meeting with this council of residents who is describing, representatives from every building, and they're talking about what's going on. And I was like, well, what do we want to do? And here I am, like, I have great community organizer training. I speak Spanish. I was like, well, what would make most sense, And people are talking about, all of the problems, and there's problems with drugs, and there's problems with prostitution, and there's problems with all these different things, the management company not cleaning. And I was like, great, well, what if we create this council and we, plan this whole thing about, accountability in each building? And I started to like do this whole thing, and people were like, yeah. And people drive too fast in the parking lot. I wonder if we could do something about that. Speed bumps in the parking lot is what they wanted. And I was like, what do you mean? There's all these problems, and like, your kids are everywhere, and you can't find healthcare, and you can't, you don't speak the language, and there's nothing to do during the summer. So I really learned to step back and say, like, I don't know anything. I don't know anything. Tell me what you need. Tell me what would, talk. Listen, you do what you want to do in this. And not, know that I did not have any of the answers. And my job was really to listen and say, oh, it sounds like you're looking for this resource, or maybe you should talk to this person. We started with a tutoring program after school and learned pretty quickly that a lot of the kids really needed help. And then the school year ended. And so we thought, all right, well, we could do that maybe, like playground camp, where you just set up like activities outside. And if kids want to come by, they can come by. And in the first week, I thought we'd have the 30 kids. The first week we had 75. And by the end of the first week, we had 150 kids. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess there's a need here. And we made free summer camp in the parking lot, and did that for, summers. And then we, the counselors, we hired counselors as volunteers who were students in the community, mostly white students who wanted to work on their Spanish. And they started to come in to volunteer. And then the older siblings of the kids who were campers said, well, we want to come. And so we created a whole teen leadership program in the parking lot. And they got trained in like first aid and leadership and some, how to be a camp counselor and all of that kind of stuff. And then that created a whole cohort of them. And that was a pretty transformational thing for that community too, because they couldn't afford summer camp, and summer school was really expensive, and they didn't have anything to do. So it became this, 5-day a week, half day after school program that started with free lunch, because we were like, oh, someone will bring us free lunches. Great. So like we tapped in little by little. And I think by not making, what I learned is that, a few people can get together with an idea and run with it. And it transformed in many, many ways. And actually the person who succeeded me in my job there when I left to go to rabbinical school was a teenager who grew up in that complex, who got himself a scholarship to college and, graduated and was like, no, I'm going to come back and I'm going to run Westro Center. And she did. Right? It's totally the dream outcome. Absolutely. And it's like, we didn't cure poverty. We didn't cure, immigrant, injustice. We didn't, there was still drugs and, prostitution and all that other stuff. And the buildings are still disgusting, but people actually had ways to live through it in ways that met their needs. And that's amazing, right? That people can actually come together and do pretty great things.
Yeah. And this perspective you shared earlier, that one of the keys, the way I heard it, at least one of the keys to maintaining motivation is to have this sense of perspective that we're part of this longer adventure, this longer journey.
Definitely.
Was that present? Did you know that in yourself at the time? Did you learn that from those people there? Did they know that? How was that idea alive?
I mean, I think it was for me. I learned in college from a bunch of rabbis. I actually learned from the whole. I remember actually at a conference it was a Jewish feminist leadership conference for college students when somewhere in the mid 90s when I was in school.
You went to Jewish feminist leadership conferences in college.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you've been on this path for a while.
I've been on this for a while. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And, it started as like a small group. Now, of course, like they're all over the place and there's big national things. And like, in advance of the SCOTUS decision, like the National Council of Jewish Women sent out, all sorts of kit. You could sign up for kits, saying, abortion bans are against my religion and reproductive freedom is a Jewish value. And so like we were ready. But this was the 90s where things were just starting to come together. And I went to this conference and the keynote speaker was a rabbi who actually later became a mentor of mine and a colleague of mine when I had the opportunity to work with her. So Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, who's the rabbi of Congregation Beit Simchat Torah in New York City, which is the world's largest LGBTQ synagogue. It was founded in 1973. And she taught about the wilderness. And she taught this whole idea of we never actually get there. We're living here. So if the wilderness is it, this is where we are. Generations of people who, when I served, I later went on to become an intern and then to become the associate rabbi at that synagogue, and worked with her for a decade. And part of that understanding of a community that lost 25% of its membership to AIDS, right? A community that like every week was another announcement of all the people who were dying. That community of, an understanding for myself in my own coming out of the fact that I could come out as a lesbian in the late 90s and have my family embrace and my family celebrate and my community celebrate. The fact that I could still go on to become a rabbi, that my wife and I could get married in our synagogue in 2002. That's a really long, it's 20 years ago next week. And the idea of that, all of that is because people have been on this journey for generations before me, right? I was not kicked out of my house for being gay, but many people were. Right? I was not told you can't be a religious leader, but many people were, and they lived and worked to change that outcome. And I'm living in it because of them. And so I think recognizing, it's a little bit of an ego check, right? It's like, I'm not the first one to go through this. I'm not the last one to go through this, but I'm trying to make it better because I want it better for me. I want it better for my kids. I want it better for everybody else. I want to, that's what I think, is this idea that it's long, and that, Tony Kushner wrote in a parody song about being Jewish that Pharaoh doesn't win, even if the wicked seem to be winning all the time. But Pharaoh doesn't win, which is one of the core stories in Judaism is this experience of liberation from enslavement. And that in the end, the one who's enslaving doesn't win, but it might take 400 years. Right. And the people who are enslaved in the first generation have no idea that 400 years later it'll be over.
Yeah, to them and to people in the first 399 years, it looks like Pharaoh is totally winning.
Mm-hmm. Right. Think about this country. Right. Think about the Black people that were trafficked away from their homes and brought here for generations. They had no idea we'd be living in this moment. Right. I mean, and right now, there will be people generations after who will say, like, wait a minute, you didn't teach about systemic racism in your public elementary school classrooms, and you didn't deconstruct all the systems that are keeping people separate, right? And it's happening fast. And there's so much to be done. It'll take a long time.
So one of the things that brings to mind for me is, so I work as an executive coach, and I help people just get fully aligned with their potential. So, but part of the challenge there is that if someone has a vision and it's really, and the bigger the vision is, the deeper, the more authentic, the more passionate, the harder it can be to express. And when you do, the more like overwhelming it can feel, because it's just like, oh, I have this big vision, but I'm just so small. And what I love so much about what you're saying and what I learned from it is that the dosage of the goal is just so important. That ego check you said. If I'm going to be the person to like fix conflict in the Middle East, then it feels so small and so difficult and so hard, and everything you see is the exact opposite of where you're trying to go, that it can be crushing, like hope crushing, and we can maybe just not even get started. But if you measure, you're like, oh, I'm part of this movement, and my next contribution in the next 5 years is going to be to mediate, to like live in this one community and serve this one community and see what happens to like people's hearts when they're exposed to these ideas in this one community, then it's much more, it's less fragile.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's exactly it, right? Like the proportion is important, right? And I think the idea, the most problematic word in the I'm going to make this radical big impact is I, right? That the one person I'm going to do this is the thing that gets in the way, right? Because we focus on I have to do all these things and I have to be all this way and I'm just one person. And it's, yeah, you're just one person. So who are you going to do it with? Right? What are the partners? The biggest, I think the biggest gains of the civil rights movements in this country have been the fact that we've recognized that they are calculated and collective and planful and organized, right? Like Rosa Parks wasn't just tired, right? She picked the right day after going to 2 years of organizer training to know when, and she was the right person. It wasn't Claudette Colvin, who was a teenager and who was pregnant, right? They picked and lighter skinned, right? They picked somebody who, for a particular reason. And yes. And she said, okay, it's not like the Montgomery bus boycott started immediately and they organized between Thursday when it happened and Sunday when people were sitting in the pews of their churches. They had it ready to go. They just had to start the mimeograph, right? They had to start getting it out and they were ready. And I think that's the thing to remember, that we are really small, but in numbers and collectively we can do much more. And we will make much more impact. And that we shouldn't ever be alone. I mean, Judaism has this beautiful concept that when you are praying, there are certain prayers that can only be said in the presence of what's called a minyan. It's M-I-N-Y-A-N, not like the little, Despicable Me characters, which, many of our kids love to be like, oh, it's the minions. They do your bidding. No, not at all. It's a great pun. But this idea of minyan comes from this idea that there's a teaching that says when 10 people sit and occupy themselves with words of Torah, with words of learning or words of doing together or doing good together, the presence of God dwells among them. That you need 10 people in order to pray. And you need 10 people in order to invoke the name of the divine and say, let us bless together. You need 10 people to say the memorial prayers that you say when you're saying Kaddish, when you remember somebody who's died. You have to be saying that in the presence of 10 adults. You need 10 adults to be present to say the 7 blessings at a wedding. You need 10 adults to read the Torah. All moments are designed so that you are never celebrating or mourning alone. And that's the collective piece. And everybody should be able to have that, right? Whether you're talking about Jewish traditions or you're talking about, everybody should have the 10 people that they can gather around them when they need to get something done, right? Or then, right? You need to be able to be like, I'm calling on the people.
It's just so intense. It's so intensely different than how our society functions and what it's optimized for.
Right. The little middle schooler that did not have a group feels incredibly repaired by that concept, right?
And I'm like a very social person. I have people over all the time. And yet the number of times, you have 10 adults together to do, it really is that's what it means to be in community. You have a pizza party, you have 10 adults, every little task is taken care of by somebody.
And the thing about, intentional and in Judaism and ritual communities and in Jewish communities is that that's different than your friends, right? You want to have friends and yes, you choose those people because they bring certain things. But the thing about saying you have to have 10 people, they may not be people that you know or people you like. They could be somebody that's radically different than you are and that you argue on every social political issue. But will they come and make a meal for you when somebody dies in your family? Absolutely. That's the kind of people we're talking about, right? The way that we say we are actually obligated to each other to make this community. And, it's that blessing of showing up, right? It might not be because you love the person or you want to have dinner with them, but who knows what will happen when you get together.
Yeah. God, that's so amazing. So normally I like to hear about people's lives more than just their opinions about random things, but I'm going to engage in a little bit of speculation here. What is a way, a non-sectarian, a non-religious tradition way that we could integrate that idea into our community life in this country that, with the express aim of like leading to like healing, like political healing of all kinds. Because I don't know very many people from like the other sides politically. And some of that's conscious and some of that's unconscious. But I think my life would be really enriched if I had some sort of thing where I had to go and get 10 people and they just had to be humans that I was connecting with, regardless of like whether I agreed with them or not. Is there a way we can port that idea over that you've
I mean, it would be great, right? Like thinking about like the things that are like great equalizers in our society, right? Like, everybody gets, people are sad when they lose someone they love, right? People are, when something good happens and you want to celebrate, and we live in such siloed ways, right? Like even, I'm trying to think of like what in my community is the place where people from all different walks of life and all different elements might come together. Well, housing in this country is really segregated, right? Economic divisions mean that you tend to live more near people who look and act and experience things the same way you do, right? I could think about like, there's one high school in Evanston, which has, like 80,000 people. And the high school itself has like 4,000 kids, and it's one high school. And like, that's the one place that everybody would come together. What would it mean, in high school if you were randomly paired in a group of 10 people and like there was some consequence or task or something that was required of you? I don't know. I think it's an interesting idea to capitalize on in some way, like, not capitalize, that's probably the wrong word, to, motivate on.
Yeah, I want to integrate that into our civic life somehow.
It's cultural to the way we live and the way our country was founded.
Oh yeah. I mean, even just like a simple example, I live in a rural area. There's a lot of people, we do a lot of farming and construction, and you just got to do a lot of the things yourself. And I've lived in communities before in different parts of the world, like India or South America or wherever, where there's a lot of community work parties. And here, the people are so skilled in doing everything themselves. Like they have all these tools to like lift heavy beams with the use of like pulleys and levers. So ordinarily I'd be like, hey man, can you come over and help me lift this beam? Like they don't need that, which is, it's brilliant, and I'm amazed by the kind of engineering aspect of it and the self-sufficiency aspect of it. But it's also like, for me, it's a lost opportunity. It's a lost opportunity to like hang out, break bread together, have a hug, just be part of someone else's process.
Right. It's like, in the quest for like, it's like almost like a toddler who's like, I do it myself. And you're like, okay, great. Right. Like we're in a country of toddlers saying like, I'm independent. I do it myself, as opposed to like, I am interdependent, right? Like we are interdependent with each other. We need each other. We can't do it all ourselves.
Because ultimately it's an illusion, this idea of doing it ourselves. It's always an illusion.
Right. And what happens, like, sure, you can do some things by yourself, but then you set up a whole, your whole world is like, when I want to do things, I do it myself. And then when I want to celebrate, oh, I'm celebrating by myself. Oh, when I'm mourning, right? Like Judaism has built into mourning customs the fact that, when you're sitting Shiva after someone has died, you're not allowed to leave your house. And the strict rules are that you don't leave for 7 days and that you don't interact with the outside world. And so the outside world comes to you. The outside world feeds you and shows up, brings the 10 people so you can pray the mourner's prayer every day. The outside world comes and, takes care of things, right? Like we see that all the time. We had a 21-year-old who died by suicide right before the pandemic started in January. And he was out of state and his family was here, and as word spread, people were like, all right, we'll take care of what we need to do. It's 7:00 in the morning, when the family was mourning, there were congregants outside shoveling the ice out of their driveway. Like there were people who, yes, people brought soup, but people took care of all sorts of stuff, right? People went accompanied so that a parent wouldn't have to fly alone to tell their other child what had happened. People sat around them, and, people went to their parents' house and said, we're just going to be here in the kitchen for whatever you need. That's remarkable, right? That's the things that we need. Otherwise, we're sitting alone in our houses.
Wow, that's incredible. The other thing, what you're saying reminded me of this idea of doing it all alone, especially like if you have this dream for social evolution or for contribution, the idea of doing it all alone is really antithetical to that whole nap philosophy. Because you can't, if it's just you, then you can't nap because then no one's doing anything.
Exactly. That's right.
And so it turns this like beautiful endogenous desire for contribution into a kind of a curse. Because it's like then I can't stop moving, or I'm disobeying or disrespecting this like internal commandment.
Right. I mean, our Jewish tradition is full of like all of the leaders, like Moses all over and over again, gets told or says like, this is too much for me. I can't do this. And the response is like, okay, we'll help, right? Make a system, bring in all the elders, bring in all the people to work, bring in all the people who can, everybody whose heart so moves them. All hands are needed. Everybody's got to be.
He's vulnerable.
Very much so. Oh yeah. Yeah, he is seen as, the leaders are not seen as this, godlike, indefatigable people. They're people who are very human, who get angry and who, argue and sit down and say like, I don't know. Because that's what part of what leaders do, right? That's how we lead by example.
Yeah. So going back to yourself then, in your own journey, journey of leadership, journey of growth, journey of Jewish feminist, journey of adventure through enslavement and liberation. What are you part of creating, and what are you going to help create in the next while? Let's say 5 years.
Yeah. I am, let's see. I'm really lucky because I get to be the kind of rabbi that I have grown into and that I really see myself being, which is a connector of people and communities and a cultivator and, I think really trying to bring people in and raise people up and make people more interdependent. And I serve a congregation that really wants me, which is really great, right? We all should have a professional, personal, whole relationship where, it's like being in a marriage, right? That you want to bring your full authentic self and you are partnered with an entity that fully wants you. That's the best. And so for me, I think it's hard to be a compassionate, empathetic, feeling person in the world. I think it's really hard to be a woman and a rabbi and a Jew and a lesbian and all of that. And I feel it. Like I'm definitely feeling the ache and the tired and all of that. I think that part of my commitment of what I want to grow is more joy. I think we need more joy. I think we have a lot of hope. We're pretty good in the like hopeful moments of that. I think there's a lot of motivation and there's a lot of organizing. For me, I think more joy in daily living and more joy in connecting with people. I know that's what I needed myself. Absolutely. More joy. And I think that, more collaboration. Even, I think we collaborate great within our synagogue. I think we could do better in the community. I think we could continue to keep reaching out. And I think more rest for me too. I think I'm feeling that too. Modeling long haul.
So joy, collaboration, and rest.
Yeah, I think those are pretty good ones.
Great. Can I put on my coach hat here?
Yeah, definitely.
So specifically, what would that look like? Let's say in the next 3 months from now, what would that look like?
That's great. Well, right now, I sent my 2 children off to summer camp yesterday. Our kids are 9 and 14, and they are gone for a month. And so,
what?
Yes. Somebody said to me last night, she's like, it's like you're on sabbatical. And I was like, but I'm working. She's like, no, you're on sabbatical from that job. My house is really quiet this morning. It's really pretty remarkable. Yeah. So for me, like that's actually my task because I'm really good at helping everybody else and pushing everybody else. And it's finding my stuff. So for me, I'm hoping it looks like some rest, some art, some reconnecting with my love of cooking and food, not from a place of I have to make it for everybody else all day long, but like, what do I want to make and what do I want to eat? I'm growing tomatoes in my backyard for the first time, and I'm really enjoying. They're huge, like the plants. They're the little sweet cherry tomatoes, but they're huge. I'm enjoying watching that like get bigger and bigger. So there's a lot of that for me. And really sort of more connecting back in my body because that's a really, the pandemic has not been good for that. So yeah, I think for me, that's my place. Cause I do feel like I can do my job and I have a long, I feel like I have a good long vision for that and a good long, that feels really sustainable. And then there's me and that needs attention. So yeah.
Yeah. And with the knowledge that there is no fulfilling your mission and doing your job without you.
That's totally right. And that's, I think that's a lot of the heart of it for me is figuring out, all right, well, what do I need to keep going in this?
Yeah.
I would say I'm lucky that I live in and serve the community where I live, right? Like I have a completely integrated family life, community life, social life, work life. Like I am, when I'm off, like, what is that, right? It means I turn the email off my phone. I don't check work email. I try not to schedule meetings with people, but then I go to the grocery store and I'm like, oh, hi, how's your so-and-so, right? And because we're all part of the same community and that's beautiful. And I don't want that kind of separation. And that separation is also really healthy. So thinking about how I get to be vulnerable and feel my needs fed in this community. And I'm pretty lucky that I can say to my congregants, I'm pretty fried right now. I need you. And they'll step in different ways too, with also the understanding that, there's a boundary and I still have to be available for their funeral. So yeah.
So it seems like success would look like, you've created this amazing spaciousness for the next month. Success would look like you using some of that for yourself and not just filling it with serving other people every minute of the day.
Yeah. And I need other people around me to do that too, right? I can't just say, well, I'm just doing this for me. Like I need other people that are going to come and, take me for a walk and, make me dinner. That'll be nice too.
Well, I'd love to check in with you in a few months and see how it goes.
Yeah, sure. That'd be good.
I'm so curious because it is really, I've noticed it's a challenge with a lot of people that I meet, I work with, especially people I'm inspired by, are so dedicated to service that it's almost like it's very hard to maintain that balance of remembering that you too are a person in need of service.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. When my now 14-year-old was little, she used to, she took a gymnastics class and I was sitting like up in the parent section, watching her gymnastics class and inevitably like, oh, look, there's someone who's a member of the synagogue who comes over and sits down. It's like, oh, I've been meaning to call you. I really want to talk to you about something. Right. And I'm like, well, I have office hours. We can do that. Right. Like it's made me incredibly respectful of the boundaries that other people, like I would never, if I saw my kid's teacher out to dinner, I wouldn't be like, so about that math problem. Or like, I see my doctor out in the world and be like, have you gotten my lab results back yet? Like never. We would do that. But yeah, and she used to look at me from the floor of the gymnastics gym and go like this. And I could say to the person, I was like, I'm sorry. This is what I'm here to do. I'm here to focus on watching her. And I can't right now. So this is what I'm here to do, but thanks. And I was like, that's the greatest gift ever is my kids saying, nope, I need you. And, or having them tug on my arm and go like, Ema, let's go. Okay. Can we leave? Yeah, that's actually what I'm supposed to be doing right now. And remembering that too.
Yeah, getting that permission from your kids. That's awesome. Okay, so there's a couple rituals I like to do in every interview. So one of them is I'd love to hear about someone who's been using the definition of hero that I outlined at the beginning. Someone's been a hero for you. And the second is a challenge, a task that you think would contribute to their life if they did it.
I don't think I can think of one person that I can say has been a hero to me, but I think about everyday people who keep going, right? I think about the people who are going through so much in their lives and keep going and then reach out to somebody else and say, how can I help? Right? Your world may be collapsing, but you reach out and say, how can I, let me show up for you. I know everything's crazy, but no, but that doesn't matter. I want to be there for you. And for me, that is a moment of heroism, of saying, I am going to recognize that the thing that's going on inside me here or with my situation is not the only thing in the world. Right? Or the people who, took those risks to march in those pride parades and hold hands for the first time, or the people who say no, or the people who, stand up, or whatever it is in those little tiny ways. That's, I think, the more heroic thing for me. The people who stand up in their classrooms and say, no, I have two moms. You can't say every kid has a mom and a dad, right? Those are the little moments. I think that is those are the heroes and inspirational people to me because it risks everything and it changes everything at the same time. And I think the challenge for everyone is actually to do just that, to think about who is your community, who are your people, who are the people that are in your community, even though you don't see them as your people, and where are the moments that you can stand up and say, I can help, or I'm here, right? It's the challenge of showing up. with your presence, being there. Maybe you make a pot of soup. Maybe you just, say, I see you. Whatever it is, just to connect with people and let them know that they're not alone. I don't think we can ever stop doing that. And I don't think we can ever do it too much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks so much. Yes. Cool.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great. All right. Have a great day.
That concludes another episode of the 10,000 Heroes Show. Thanks again for listening, and I hope that this has contributed in some small way to your own personal journey of heroism. I'd like to give a shout out to Pierre for the episode artwork, DJ Plainview for the theme music, and to our producer-editor, Martine. This podcast is sponsored by Momentum Lab, our year-long coaching program providing insight, accountability, a community of excellence, and one-on-one support. I encourage anyone who's intrigued to go to whatismomentumlab.com and explore. Finally, I love communication. If this episode has impacted your life in any way, let me know. Our email is info@10kh.show, and there's other ways to contact us in the show notes. Thank you, have a wonderful day, and take care.